The stars had long turned their backs on the Lorcans. Once, they were a proud race, spread across the galaxy, commanding respect from all who crossed their path. But now their empire lay in ruins. Their homeworld, once a thriving hub of advanced technology and culture, was nothing more than a desolate wasteland. The Lorcans had been discarded, shunned by the very beings they once called allies. Lyra stood in the cold, barren landscape of the Lorcan homeworld, watching as the last remnants of the once great city crumbled into dust. Towering structures, once a testament to their power, now stood abandoned, their foundations weakened by years of neglect. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it the echoes of a forgotten past. Lyra, a human ambassador, had been chosen to visit the Lorcans on behalf of the United Earth Council. Her mission was clear: to assess the situation and see if there was any hope of rebuilding the Lorcans' shattered world. She had read about the Lorcans in history books, about their incredible rise and tragic fall. But standing here, on their forsaken planet, she couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow for them. It had been decades since the Lorcans were abandoned by the intergalactic community. Their former allies had turned away when they needed help the most, leaving the Lorcans to fend for themselves. The betrayal had been swift and cruel. In an instant, they went from being respected rulers of an empire to nothing more than outcasts. The Lorcans had tried to fight back. They had attempted to form new alliances, but no one was willing to help them. The galaxy had moved on, and the Lorcans were left behind, forgotten and broken. Lyra's ship touched down softly on the planet's surface. The atmosphere was thin and the skies were gray, but she felt a strange sense of responsibility as she stepped out. She knew that humanity had been given a rare opportunity. Earth had extended a hand to the Lorcans, hoping to help them rebuild, but the question was, would the Lorcans accept it? Lyra was greeted by Creve, a Lorcan leader who had survived the downfall of his people. He stood tall, his face hardened by years of loss, his eyes filled with distrust. "You are human," Creve said, his voice low and cautious. "What is it that you want from us?" Lyra looked into his eyes, trying to understand the pain he carried. She had prepared for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the sorrow she saw in his gaze. "I'm here to help," she said softly. "Humanity wants to offer you aid. We've been through hardship ourselves, and we know what it's like to lose everything." Creve's expression didn't change, but the weight of his silence was loud enough to speak volumes. He turned and motioned for her to follow. There was no trust in his movement, only the heavy burden of a race that had been cast aside. As Lyra walked beside him, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The Lorcans were proud, and they had suffered too much to easily accept help from anyone, especially from those they once considered beneath them. But deep down, Lyra believed that together, humanity and the Lorcans could create something new. The only question was, would Creve and his people be willing to let go of their pride and accept the help they so desperately needed? Lyra followed Creve through the desolate streets of the Lorcan capital. The once grand city now lay in ruin, its streets filled with broken buildings and shattered glass. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their footsteps. It was clear that the Lorcans had once thrived here, but now the city felt like a ghost of what it had been. Creve didn't speak as he led Lyra through the ruins. His face remained impassive, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he expected danger to appear at any moment. Lyra could feel the tension in the air. Every movement, every glance, seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 lost hopes. It was as if the Lorcans had been forgotten by the stars, and now they were afraid to trust anyone who might bring more disappointment. "Why are you here, human?" Creve finally spoke, his voice low but firm. He didn't turn to look at her, his gaze still fixed on the distance. "What do you want from us?" Lyra stopped walking for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had been prepared for many things on this journey, but she hadn't expected to feel this sense of helplessness. Creve's bitterness was a wall she wasn't sure how to climb. She had hoped that her words would be enough to bridge the gap between their people, but now she wasn't so sure. "I'm here to help," she said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Humanity wants to offer assistance. We've been through our own struggles, and we know what it's like to lose everything. You don't have to do this alone. Cree finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it felt as though the entire world held its breath. Then he spoke again, his words sharp and direct. You think we need help. We have survived without anyone's help. What makes you believe your people can offer anything we haven't already rejected? Lyra's heart sank. She knew the Lorcans had been abandoned by their allies, but hearing Creeve's words made the pain feel real. The galaxy had turned its back on them, and now here she was, asking them to trust her people. I'm not asking for you to forget what's happened, Lyra said, her voice growing stronger. I'm asking you to think about the future. You have a chance to rebuild, to start over. We have resources, knowledge, things that could help you get back on your feet. Creeve studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowed. And why should I trust you? He asked, his voice cold. What's in this for you? Is it just pity? Lyra shook her head. It's not pity. It's a chance for both of us to create something better. Humanity is strong because we know how to overcome. We help each other. That's what I'm offering you. A chance to be part of something bigger. Creeve remained silent, but his gaze softened for the first time. He didn't say anything, but there was something in his eyes, something that suggested he was considering her words. As they continued their walk through the ruined city, Lyra knew that gaining Creeve's trust wouldn't be easy. The Lorcans had been hurt too much, and they weren't ready to let anyone in. But she also knew that if she gave up now, they would remain alone in the darkness. And she couldn't let that happen. The days following Lyra's first conversation with Creeve were tense. The Lorcans remained suspicious, and Lyra knew that gaining their trust would take time. The people of this broken world had suffered for so long that they weren't willing to believe in anyone, especially not a human. Their pride had been shattered, and every offer of help felt like another reminder of their downfall. Lyra spent her days exploring the city, speaking to the Lorcans, trying to understand their pain. Many of them had never seen a human before and were curious but afraid. They whispered to each other, their eyes always watching her. Some even stared at her with distrust, as if expecting her to turn on them at any moment. Despite the cold reception, Lyra remained patient. She knew that to change their hearts, she had to prove that humanity wasn't like the others who had abandoned them. But every time she offered help, she was met with resistance. Creeve, though less vocal, had become more approachable over the days. He still didn't trust her, but his sharp gaze had softened slightly. He would stop to listen to her whenever she spoke of the resources humans could offer. Advanced technology, food, medicine, and most importantly, knowledge of how to rebuild. Still, he said nothing in response, as if weighing every word she said. One evening, Lyra stood on the edge of a large, empty square, watching the Lorcans work to repair a broken building. The city was filled with ruin, but the Lorcans were determined to bring it back to life. They moved like soldiers, focused, disciplined, but weary. It was clear they had been trying to rebuild for years, but without the necessary resources, they had made little progress. Creeve appeared beside her without a word. He watched the workers for a moment before speaking, his voice rough. You don't understand what it's like, he said, to watch everything you once held dear slip away, to see your people abandon you. Lyra turned to him, her eyes softening. I can't imagine what that feels like, she replied. But I do know what it's like to lose. Humanity has been through its own struggles. We fought for our survival after our own wars, and we've learned how to rebuild from nothing. You're not alone anymore, Creeve. He looked at her, his eyes filled with something between pain and hope. For a moment, it felt as though he might finally accept her offer. But then he shook his head, as if pushing the thought away. You still don't understand, he repeated, his voice distant. You're offering something you think will fix us, but we are beyond fixing. Our pride is all we have left. Lyra felt a pang of sympathy. She had heard the pain in his voice, the weight of a broken leader who had seen his people fall apart. "Pride is important," she said quietly, "but so is survival. I'm offering a way to rebuild, to help your people stand tall again." Creve said nothing for a long while, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer this time. "And if we accept, what happens then?" "If you accept," Lyra said with a calm smile, "we build a future together. A future where both of our people can thrive. I can't promise that it will be easy, but I can promise that humanity will be there for you. We will help you every step of the way." Creve finally looked at her with a mixture of doubt and curiosity. There was a long silence before he nodded slowly. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a start. And for Lyra, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and the uneasy silence between Lyra and the Lorcans began to feel like an endless barrier. Though Creve had softened, he still hesitated to fully trust her or her people. His pride, though shaken, held him back from making any bold decisions. The Lorcans had suffered too much, and accepting help felt like admitting defeat. It was a wound that had not yet healed. Lyra understood his hesitation. She had been on Earth when the human people had endured hardship, wars, famine, and destruction. But humanity had always been able to rebuild, to find strength and unity. She believed the same could happen for the Lorcans, but she couldn't force them to accept her offer. They had to make the decision on their own. One day, as Lyra was walking through the remains of the once thriving city, Creve approached her. His steps were slow, measured, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "We have discussed this," he began, "but I still don't know if it is wise to trust you or your people. You say you want to help, but you don't know what it's like to lose everything." Lyra stopped and turned to face him. "I do understand, Creve," she said softly. "I may not know what it feels like to lose a world, but I know what it's like to lose hope. And I'm offering a way to find it again. Humanity has been through its own struggles, but we found a way forward. I believe you can too." Creve remained silent, his eyes looking toward the horizon. It was as if he was weighing every word she said, every possibility. Lyra waited patiently. She had learned that the Lorcans, especially their leaders, needed time to make decisions. There was no rushing them, and she wasn't going to force them into anything. It had to be their choice. Finally, Creve spoke again. "If we accept your offer, there will be no going back. We would have to trust you, trust your people. We cannot afford to make another mistake." Lyra nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I'm not asking you to forget the past," she replied. "I'm asking you to look forward, to see what's possible. Humanity is offering you more than just resources. We're offering a partnership, a chance to rebuild together." Creve's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in them. It was small, but it was there. After a long pause, he sighed deeply, as though a great burden had been lifted from his shoulders. "Very well," Creve said quietly. "We will accept your help. But understand this is not an easy decision. We are not weak, and we will not be treated as such. You will prove to us that your help is genuine, or we will turn away. There will be no second chances." Lyra felt a rush of relief and excitement. It wasn't the complete acceptance she had hoped for, but it was a start. The Lorcans were willing to take the first step toward rebuilding, and that was something she could work with. "I promise you, Creve," she said, her voice firm. "You will see that humanity's offer is sincere. Together, we can make your people strong again." Creve nodded slowly, and for the first time in weeks, Lyra felt like they had reached some common ground. She had no illusions that it would be easy, but she now had a chance to prove that humanity could help. The Lorcans were finally ready to accept assistance, and maybe, just maybe, they were ready to trust again. The following days were filled with activity. The Lorcans had agreed to accept humanity's help, but the road ahead was far from smooth. Lyra worked tirelessly with the Lorcans, sharing human technology and knowledge that could aid them in their rebuilding efforts. The resources were plentiful, But trust was not something that could be handed over so easily. The Lorcans remained cautious, unsure if the humans truly had their best interests at heart. Despite the challenges, there were small signs of progress. The Lorcans started to accept the human-made equipment, using it to fix their broken infrastructure. Their cities began to show faint glimmers of hope, though they were still far from what they once had been. Lyra remained hopeful, but she knew this fragile trust could shatter at any moment if something went wrong. Then, one evening, as Lyra was sitting with Creve, the calm was broken. They were seated in a small, quiet room, surrounded by maps and blueprints for the city's restoration. Lyra had just finished explaining how humans could help rebuild their energy grid when Creve suddenly stopped her. "You don't know everything about us, Lyra," he said, his voice suddenly tense. "There's something you should know. A truth we've kept hidden for a long time." Lyra looked at him, her curiosity piqued. She had been working alongside the Lorcans for weeks, but there was still so much she didn't understand about their culture and history. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone gentle. Creve hesitated before speaking again, his gaze distant. "The real reason the galaxy abandoned us, it's not just because we were weak. There's something else, something darker. A secret that could change everything." Lyra leaned forward, sensing the seriousness of the conversation. "What secret?" Creve stood and walked over to a nearby table, picking up a small, ancient-looking device. He held it out to her, and she took it cautiously. It was a strange piece of technology, unlike anything she had ever seen. The surface was engraved with intricate symbols, some of which Lyra couldn't even begin to understand. "This device," Creve explained, "was created by the Lorcan Empire long before it fell. It holds the key to our downfall. You see, we weren't always the peaceful race you see now. We were once conquerors, ruthless in our pursuit of power. The galaxy feared us, and rightly so. But we did something terrible, something that cost us everything." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. The Lorcans, a race known for their strength and pride, had once been conquerors. She couldn't wrap her mind around it. Creve continued, his voice growing darker. "In our quest for power, we discovered something forbidden, something that could have made us the supreme race in the galaxy. But we made the mistake of using it, and it tore us apart. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something far worse. And when we used it, we lost the trust of our allies. That's when the galaxy turned its back on us." Lyra's mind raced as she processed the information. She had known the Lorcans were once a mighty empire, but this was something else. "What did you do, Creve? What was it?" Creve's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was a hint of regret in his expression. "We created a weapon that could control minds. It wasn't just for war. It was meant to make others bend to our will. But it backfired. The more we used it, the more we lost control. The weapon began to turn on us. We lost ourselves in the process, and in the end, the galaxy saw us as a threat that could never be trusted again." Lyra felt the weight of his words. The Lorcans had fallen not because they were weak, but because of their own ambition and their mistakes. It wasn't a simple betrayal. It was a tragedy of their own making. She looked at Creve, her heart heavy. "So this is the truth. The galaxy abandoned you because of this." "Yes," Creve replied. "And now we are paying the price for it. The weapon still exists, and it still holds the power to control us if we're not careful." Lyra stared at the device in her hands. She had always known that there was more to the Lorcan story, but she never imagined it would be this complicated. The truth was darker than she could have imagined, but now it was clear. The Lorcans weren't just trying to rebuild their empire. They were fighting against a part of their own past that still haunted them. The revelation about the Lorcans' dark past hung heavy in the air. Lyra couldn't stop thinking about the mind control weapon. It was a powerful tool, one that could easily change the course of their future if it ever resurfaced. And though Creve seemed determined to keep it under control, Lyra could sense the fear in his voice. The Lorcans were struggling not only to rebuild their broken empire, but also to contain the consequences of their past mistakes. Lyra's mission had suddenly grown more complex. What began as an effort to offer resources and assistance now felt like a race against time. If the weapon was still a threat, the Lorcans needed more than just food or building supplies. They needed guidance, control, and perhaps most importantly, a way to make sure history didn't repeat itself. The days following the conversation with Creve were filled with intense work. Lyra, along with a team of human engineers and scientists, set to work providing more advanced technology to help the Lorcans rebuild their infrastructure. Humans brought tools for clean energy, new farming techniques, and systems to purify their water. They even shared medical advancements that could heal the wounds left by years of neglect. It was all part of the plan, to prove to the Lorcans that humanity wasn't just offering empty promises. Despite the busy days, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Creve had accepted the help, but there was still a noticeable distance between him and the humans. The Lorcans were not eager to share their fears about the mind control weapon. They were ashamed, and rightfully so. And yet, Lyra knew that it was a truth they would have to confront together. One afternoon, as Lyra was walking through a Lorcan medical facility, a young engineer approached her with urgent news. "Ambassador Lyra," he said, his face pale. "There's been an issue with the purification system we installed. Some of the Lorcans are feeling strange. They're disoriented and having trouble concentrating." Lyra's heart raced. The purification system was one of the most important projects they had completed, and if something had gone wrong, it could damage their already fragile trust. "Take me to them," she said, her voice calm but firm. The engineer led her to a small group of Lorcans who had gathered in a large room. They looked confused, their eyes glazed over. Lyra recognized the symptoms immediately. It was the same disorientation Creve had described when talking about the weapon. Could it be possible that the mind control device had somehow been triggered? "Is it the weapon?" she asked, turning to Creve, who had followed her into the room. Creve's face was tight with worry. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "But we've done everything to make sure it wasn't activated. It's possible the weapon's effects are deeper than we thought." Lyra moved closer to the group, trying to assess the situation. She could feel the weight of Creve's words pressing down on her. If the weapon's influence was still lingering, humanity's aid might not be enough to save the Lorcans. They would need a solution far more complex than just technology or resources. "We need to find the source of this," Lyra said, turning to the engineer. "Are there any scans we can run? Any way to check for signs of mind control?" The engineer nodded. "We have a few methods. We can monitor their neural patterns and see if any abnormal activity is occurring." Lyra looked at Creve. "We need to act quickly. If the weapon's influence is still there, we need to find a way to shut it down before it's too late." Creve's eyes darkened, a look of determination spreading across his face. "I'll help you. Whatever it takes, we'll stop it. We can't let the past destroy us again." Lyra nodded, a sense of urgency rising in her chest. The Lorcans' future was uncertain, and every moment counted. The real test was not just helping them rebuild their cities or restore their resources. It was about helping them face the darker parts of their history and find a way to move forward without repeating the mistakes that had nearly destroyed them. The days following the unsettling incident in the medical facility were filled with urgency. Lyra and the Lorcans had worked tirelessly to monitor the strange symptoms affecting some of the population. There was no doubt in her mind that something was wrong, something far beyond a simple technical malfunction. The scans of the Lorcans who had shown signs of disorientation revealed strange neural patterns. The data pointed toward a distant, almost dormant influence, one that Lyra feared could be linked to the mind control weapon Creve had told her about. The technology they had been using to help the Lorcans rebuild their world seemed to be triggering an old, dangerous mechanism buried deep in their systems. "We have to find a way to neutralize it," Lyra said, standing over the data table, her eyes scanning the troubling readouts. If this is the weapon's lingering effect, we can't afford to let it spread. Creve had been silent for days, clearly troubled by the developments. The weight of his people's past hung heavy on him. The pride that once defined the Lorcans had been crushed long ago, and now it seemed that the very thing they had feared most was starting to take root again. "This is the last thing we wanted," Creve said, his voice rough. "To bring the weapon back into play. I thought we had it under control." "You've done what you could," Lyra replied, trying to offer some comfort. "But now we need to act. Together. You have humanity's resources, and I have the knowledge to help. We can't do this alone." Creve looked at her, his face tight with frustration. "It's not just the weapon. It's everything that comes with it. The fear, the mistrust. I don't know if we can ever fully escape what we've done." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to reassure him. "You don't have to face this alone. We're in this together." As they continued to analyze the data, Lyra and Creve worked side by side, finding solutions and creating plans. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. The weapon was more than just a physical device. It had become embedded in the Lorcan psyche, a dark memory that continued to influence their thoughts and actions. "We need to confront this," Lyra said. "We need to face the truth of what happened, no matter how difficult it is." It was not an easy task. The Lorcans had spent years trying to bury the past, but Lyra knew that in order to move forward, they had to confront it. The secret of the weapon, the mind control technology, was not just a piece of history. It was a piece of them, something that had shaped their rise and fall. Creve agreed, though he was clearly conflicted. "I know you're right. But many of my people are not ready to hear this. They still believe that we can rebuild without confronting the truth." Lyra nodded. "I understand. But we've already started this journey together. Now we have to finish it." Together, they called a meeting with the Lorcan Council. Creve, though hesitant, explained to his people that they needed to face the past in order to secure their future. He shared everything: the weapon, the betrayal, and the consequences of their actions. At first, the council was silent, the room heavy with disbelief. But slowly, one by one, they began to speak. The Lorcans weren't ready to forgive themselves, but they were ready to fight for their future. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way forward. As Lyra watched the council, she felt a sense of hope growing within her. The Lorcans had always been a proud people, and now they were beginning to understand that true strength came not from their past, but from the courage to change. Together, humanity and the Lorcans would face their shared struggles, and together, they would find a way to build a future that honored both their histories. The decision to confront the past had not come easily for the Lorcans. Yet, after their difficult meeting with the council, something had shifted in the air. It wasn't a sudden change, but there was a new resolve among the Lorcans. They no longer viewed their history as something to hide from. Instead, they began to see it as something to learn from, something to use as they moved forward, together with humanity. But even as they took their first steps toward recovery, a new threat loomed on the horizon. Lyra had been working late one evening, reviewing the latest scans of the city's energy grid, when the alarm sounded. The shrill sound cut through the quiet of the Lorcan facility, and Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She knew something was wrong. "Creve!" she shouted, rushing toward the door. The Lorcan leader appeared almost immediately, his face set in a grim expression. "What's happening?" he asked. Lyra's voice was urgent as she handed him a data tablet. "We've detected unusual energy signatures. Something is coming. Something dangerous." Creve's face tightened. He didn't need to ask for more details. The signs were clear. The energy signatures were too precise, too organized to be a natural occurrence. Someone was intentionally causing disturbances in their systems. Could it be them? Lyra asked, fear creeping into her voice. "The ones who turned against you, the ones who abandoned you." Creve didn't answer immediately. His gaze turned cold, calculating. "It's possible," he said, his voice low. "The ones who betrayed us. They never truly left. They are watching us from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike." Lyra knew exactly what Creve meant. The Lorcans had been betrayed by their former allies long ago, and though the galaxy had turned its back on them, those same enemies were still lurking, ready to exploit any weakness. "They want to finish what they started," Creve continued, his eyes narrowing. "If we rise again, they'll be forced to deal with us, and they won't allow that." "We need to prepare," Lyra said, her mind racing. "We can't let them destroy everything we've worked for." Creve nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. "I'll call the council," he said. "We need to organize the defense. If they want a fight, they'll get one." As the council gathered, the tension was palpable. The Lorcans knew their enemies would stop at nothing to prevent them from rebuilding. But this time, they were not alone. The humans had offered their help, and together, they would stand strong. Lyra and Creve worked tirelessly with the council, organizing the defense and fortifying their cities. Humanity brought its advanced weapons and strategies, offering expertise that the Lorcans lacked. In return, the Lorcans provided their knowledge of the terrain and their strength as warriors. Together, they built a plan that would ensure their survival. But as the days passed and the tension grew, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Their enemies were closing in. She knew the Lorcans and humans couldn't afford any mistakes. If they were to survive this attack, they had to be prepared, both in mind and spirit. The final night before the attack, Lyra stood on the balcony of the Lorcan Command Center, looking out over the city. It was quiet, almost peaceful, but she knew that wouldn't last. The battle was coming, and there was no turning back. Beside her, Creve stood silently, his posture resolute. "We will fight," he said, his voice steady. "And we will win. Together." Lyra nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the coming conflict. "Together," she echoed, a quiet promise. And as the first stars appeared in the sky, Lyra knew that the Lorcans' journey was far from over. They had faced their darkest secrets, and now they would face their greatest test. The galaxy had abandoned them, but they would fight for their future. And this time, they wouldn't fight alone. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as the sun began to set over the Lorcan capital. The battle was about to begin. Lyra stood with Creve on the balcony, looking out at the darkening horizon. The city was eerily quiet, but she could feel the pulse of urgency beneath the calm. The Lorcans and humans had spent days preparing for this moment, and now there was nothing left to do but wait. The enemies, who had once turned their backs on the Lorcans, were now ready to strike. They had gathered in secret, planning to destroy the fragile alliance between humanity and the Lorcans before it could take root. But they had underestimated the determination of both races. Lyra had no illusions. The fight ahead would be fierce, but she knew that if they were to survive, they had to stand together. She wasn't just fighting for the Lorcans, she was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy, for the chance to prove that cooperation could triumph over betrayal. As the first explosions echoed in the distance, Lyra felt her heart race. The battle had begun. "We need to move now," Creve said, his voice low and steady. Lyra nodded, her mind already shifting into action. She turned and followed him down the stairs, toward the command center. The battle was unfolding, and the Lorcans and humans needed to be ready. She had been given a rare opportunity to prove that humanity could help restore peace, and now that opportunity was at risk. The fighting was intense. Explosions rocked the streets as enemy ships swooped down, unleashing fire on the city. The Lorcans and humans fought side by side, using their combined knowledge to defend the capital. The Lorcans, with their fierce warrior spirit, moved with precision, while humanity's advanced technology gave them an edge in the chaos of the battlefield. Lyra found herself at the heart of the action, coordinating efforts between the Lorcans and humans. It wasn't easy. The enemy was relentless, but Lyra saw something in the Lorcans that gave her hope. They were fighting not just for survival, but for redemption. Every strike, every counterattack, was a symbol of their desire to rebuild and to prove they were no longer defined by their past. As the battle raged on, Lyra found herself at the front lines, directing troops and making decisions on the fly. But even in the chaos, she never lost sight of the bigger picture. This wasn't just a fight for the city, it was a fight for the future. Finally, after hours of fierce combat, the tide began to turn. The enemy forces, though strong, were starting to lose their momentum. The combined strength of the Lorcans and humans was overwhelming, and the attackers began to retreat. Victory was within reach. When the final explosion signaled the retreat of the enemy, the battlefield fell silent. Exhausted but victorious, Lyra and Creve stood side by side, watching the smoke rise from the ruined streets. They had won, but it had come at a great cost. The city was damaged, but the alliance between humanity and the Lorcans had been tested and proven strong. "We did it," Lyra said, her voice filled with both relief and sadness. "We've proven that we can work together." Creve looked at her, his eyes filled with respect. "This is only the beginning, Lyra. We've shown the galaxy that we are not a race to be forgotten. But there is much more to be done." Lyra nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The Lorcans had won this battle, but the war for their place in the galaxy was far from over. The true victory wasn't just in defeating their enemies, it was in the trust they had built between themselves and humanity. As the city began to rebuild once again, Lyra felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt before. The Lorcans had faced their past, and now they were ready to face the future. Together, with humanity by their side, they would rise again. The battle was over. The city, though scared by the violence, stood firm. Smoke still rose from the streets, but there was a sense of peace now, a stillness that followed the chaos. The enemy had retreated, and the Lorcans had survived their greatest test yet. Humanity had stood with them, side by side, proving that cooperation could overcome even the deepest divides. Lyra stood in the heart of the Lorcan capital, watching as the workers began to clear the debris. The city would need months, maybe years, to fully rebuild, but for the first time, there was hope in the air. The Lorcans had faced their darkest secrets, and together, they had risen from the ashes. Creve walked up to her, his face tired but determined. "We've done it," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The city will rebuild. But more than that, we've proven to ourselves that we are not defined by our past." Lyra nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "You've done more than that. You've shown the galaxy that the Lorcans can rise again, that you have a future. You've taken the first step toward healing." Creve looked at the city, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and hope. "It wasn't easy. It never is. But we've learned something important. The past cannot be erased, but it doesn't have to control us. We have a choice, and now we have the chance to make things right." Lyra smiled, seeing the change in him. The proud, stubborn leader she had first met was still there, but now he was tempered by wisdom. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer had the power to crush him. "We all have choices," Lyra said quietly. "And now you have the opportunity to choose a future, not just for the Lorcans, but for the entire galaxy. Humanity is here to help you build that future, if you're willing." Creve turned to her, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "I'm willing," he said. "We'll build it together. The galaxy won't forget us this time." Lyra's heart raced with excitement. It was a small but important promise, a promise of a future where the Lorcans were no longer shunned, no longer forgotten. They had a place now, a chance to show the galaxy that their strength lay not just in their past, but in their ability to change, to adapt, and to rise above the mistakes that had once threatened to destroy them. As the days passed, Lyra and Creve worked together to forge a new path for their people. The human and Lorcan alliance grew stronger, and more races began to take notice. Slowly, but surely, the Lorcans were starting to regain their place in the galaxy, not through force or fear, but through the strength of their determination to rebuild. The Lorcan cities began to rise once again, each building a symbol of hope. They worked alongside humanity, combining their resources, their knowledge, and their strength. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but it was a road they were ready to walk together. One evening, as Lyra and Creve stood overlooking the rebuilt city, Creve turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice quiet. "But there's still much to do." Lyra nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride. "Yes, but we'll do it together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it as partners." Creve gave her a rare smile, his eyes filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Together. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Lyra knew that the Lorcan story was far from finished. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. They had a future, one that they would build together, with humanity at their side. It was a new beginning, and it was just the start of what they could accomplish.